This is a video response to Religious Fiction's video, Atheists, Why Live? As she explains in her video, Christians sometimes ask the question of atheists, if you don't believe in God, why live? And it seems to me that there's an implicit premise behind this question, and there are a few possibilities about what that implicit premise could be. One possibility is, without God, there is no eternal reward for enduring the hardship of life. While this assumes that life is of such great hardship for everyone that an eternal reward is needed to keep going. But we don't all live lives like Job, and many of us enjoy life enough that we have adequate reward for any hardships we must suffer. I covered this in more depth in my video, Does Atheism Cause Depression? Another possibility as to the implicit premise behind this question is, without God, life has no meaning, and a meaningless life isn't worth living. Well, God is not the only source of meaning. As Viktor Frankl points out in Man's Search for Meaning, we can find meaning through creativity, through love, or through facing suffering. The meaning of life is also touched on in my video, Does Atheism Cause Depression? And I plan to address it in more depth in a future video. One more possible implicit premise here behind the question is, without God, life has no value. And this is the topic of this video. I will be arguing that no matter whether there is a God, each human life does have inherent worth and dignity. Now I'll open here by quoting from the opening lines of Albert Camus' book, The Myth of Sisyphus. Albert Camus is an atheist, and he's writing, "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy." And when I was in college, Albert Camus' book served as a catalyst to the line of thinking that I'll be sharing in this video, though I'm not going to be describing what Camus says in his book any further than this. Now, to understand why our lives have value, let's first distinguish between two different kinds of value. One is intrinsic value, what has value in and of itself, no matter what purpose it may serve, and no matter what use it may be put to. The other is instrumental value, value derived from serving an external purpose, ultimately depending upon the intrinsic value of something else. And here are some examples of things with instrumental value. Money we use that to buy goods or services, but apart from what we can buy with money, it really has no value to us. And here's food, which we use to feed ourselves with. Houses, we use houses to shelter ourselves, to store things in, to gather together in. And furniture, we use furniture for a variety of purposes, such as writing at desks, sleeping on beds, eating at tables, sitting on chairs. But apart from the uses we make of furniture, it has no intrinsic value of its own. Well, with instrumental value in mind, we may ask the question, do our lives have instrumental value? Yes, they do. Our lives can have instrumental value through taking care of other people, through providing goods for other people, through entertaining other people, through educating other people, through saving lives, as well as through many other ways. But without some kind of intrinsic value, instrumental value is ultimately empty. If your life has no intrinsic value, then serving you does not give my life any genuine instrumental value. And the problem here is that if no one's life has intrinsic value, then the things we do for each other ultimately have no genuine instrumental value. And so without intrinsic value, we would have no value at all, ultimately. So we need that intrinsic value to have value. Well, one solution to this problem, which I believe some theists take, is to presume that the value of their lives comes from serving God. Since God has intrinsic value, this is supposed to give our lives value too. But this sometimes takes a wrong turn when people who have an impoverished sense of love believe in a wrathful God who shows his love for them by sparing them from the punishment he is going to inflict on others. Unfortunately, finding your sense of value by believing you are part of a chosen people is all too common among world religions. It is also the basis of almost every cult. But atheists deny that our lives derive value from God. Besides that, value derived from God is only instrumental value anyway. Why live unless my life actually has its own intrinsic value? Also, when it comes down to it, the idea that we get our value from God seems disingenuous. Even theists love God on the grounds that he will grant them immortality and eternal bliss. They value their own lives first, and they believe in a God who serves that value. And to make this point even more starkly, consider, would anyone love a God who would consign everyone to eternal torment? And here I'm not talking about the kind of God that many people believe in, who is going to consign almost everyone to eternal torment, but spare the believers. I'm talking here about a God who would consign everyone to eternal torment. And it seems to me no one would love a God like this. Yet, if only God has intrinsic value, what would be wrong with this? If these people here do not have any intrinsic value, then what does it matter whether they get tossed into hell to burn forever, or they get killed, or they live lives of eternal bliss? It doesn't seem to matter if their lives have no genuine intrinsic value. Also, I'd like to suggest that when Christians say that man was created in the image of God, this may mean that, like God, each human life has intrinsic value. This is not value that is derived from God, but value that is inherent in each individual life. The idea here is that God made beings that are sufficiently like himself that for the same reasons that God's life has intrinsic value, their lives also have intrinsic value. And so that value is derived from what they inherently are, rather than from an external source such as God. And I'm going to argue here that my life has intrinsic value. My life is valuable to me regardless of what purpose it can serve for anyone else. My life is not simply valued by something else. It is self-valuing. Now, an objection may be made here. Yes, I value my life, but isn't that value subjective? Aren't I just subjectively valuing my life? And I might subjectively value something that is not of true value to me, such as, for example, candy or cigarettes. So subjectively valuing something is no guarantee that it has any value at all. But the value I place on my life is not mere subjective value. To value anything at all, including what is of real value, I must value my life. It is the prerequisite value for me to value anything. Or it's also more than objective value. Objective value is what is of real value to me, regardless of whether I recognize how it could be valuable to me. And nothing can have objective value to me unless my life has real value. But the value of my life does not depend upon anything else. Not on public acclaim, not on God's love, not on any purpose my life may serve. The value of my life is fundamental. It's irreducible to anything else. Now, my subjective values may change as I change my mind or my tastes. What is objectively of value to me may change with my circumstances. But the value my life has to me will never change. It is an absolute value. At this point, I will summarize my argument for why my life has intrinsic value. The value of my life is absolute. It is the foundation that allows anything else to be of objective value to me. I cannot subjectively value a thing without first valuing my own life. I value my life regardless of what purpose it may serve or what use it may be put to. Therefore, my life has intrinsic value. For the same reasons applied to others, every human life has intrinsic value. That includes you. Your life has intrinsic value. No matter whether God loves you, hates you, or doesn't even exist, your life has inviolable intrinsic value. The first principle of Unitarian Universalism is to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This may be understood as what I've been calling intrinsic value. Something like this idea is also expressed in one form of Kant's categorical imperative, where he says, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. An end here is something that has value in and of itself, something that has its own purposes. And to treat humanity and yourself or in other people as an end is to recognize the inherent value in yourself and in each person, and to recognize that you and other people each have your own particular purposes in life. You each have your own particular values, things that are important to you. And what matters to you is important, even if it's not something that matters to another person. And also what matters to other people is important to them, even if it's not something that would personally matter to you. This formulation of the categorical imperative also sheds light on what is meant in the Bible when Jesus says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. To love your neighbor adequately, you must also love yourself. He says, love your neighbor as yourself, not just love your neighbor a whole lot or more than yourself, but as yourself. So you have to love yourself too for this to have any real force on how you treat other people. And this may also be understood as like this: recognize in both yourself and others the inherent worth and dignity of being human. And this is a way to feel compassion towards each other, or to feel agape, which is a word for Christian love. Also, when we recognize our own inherent worth and dignity, we become more survival-oriented. This makes us more enthusiastic, less apathetic, and more inclined to fight for what really matters to us, especially life itself. If we treat ourselves as ends, as people with inherent worth and dignity, we cannot live as second-handers. Second-handers are a sort of person that Howard Rourke, the hero of Ayn Rand's novel The Fountainhead, complains about. And these are essentially people who look outward for their sense of value. Second-handers care more about keeping up appearances than they do about reality. A second-hander would rather appear honest than be honest, would rather appear good than be good, would rather be loved by God or by other people than love himself. A second-hander would rather bring down someone who appears better than him than make the effort to become a better person. In contrast to this, someone who recognizes his own inherent worth and dignity believes that he should be a good person himself, that his self-esteem should be grounded in reality, not simply in what others think of him, but in things that he knows about himself, because he knows he cannot fool himself into believing he's a good person by telling himself that others like him. And so he cares about his self-esteem, and this may be grounded in such things as living consciously, self-acceptance, self-responsibility, self-assertiveness, living purposefully, and personal integrity. And when you recognize the inherent worth and dignity of others, you also recognize that other people matter, and you can find genuine value in doing things for others. Beyond the intrinsic value of your own life, this provides additional reasons to go on living. So, thank you for watching, and check out the other videos on this channel.